welcome everyone. We are at a roundtable discussion, which is discussing all about rising women leaders. And right now, with me, I have 6 amazing panelists who have joined us from some absolutely inspirational brands of companies. They hold some, great positions with them, and their experience talks about how far they've come, plus the insights that they are about to share today with us. My name is Kajal, and I work with Jobs for Her and the Her Key Club in the capacity of a lead. We have Her Key from the past 2 years, a women in leadership networking platform, and inside the club we house some amazing women who start anywhere with 10 plus years of experience, go up to 30 plus years. It's an amazingly supportive, encouraging, great vibe networking platform to be part of. Do look us up. We are at www.herkey.club, and we also have a LinkedIn presence. Before I jump in, let me quickly give you an introduction to the team and our panelists. Discussing today, we have why corporate India needs more women leaders, and how do we tying in with the theme of International Women's Day, which is breaking the bias. Shatter the glass ceiling, break the stereotype, change makers, path breakers. Although these words sound highly motivating and inspiring, women in leadership positions are still very few as ground reality. Is it an unconscious bias that underlies organizations when women are actually ready to take control of higher roles and lead from the front? Or do we blame it on societal norms and social conditioning that a woman instinctively feels questioned herself about her rise to the top? Or is it a combination of all these factors? We have been debating how there are such few women in leadership roles and in top management positions for years now. Despite having had women in power rule the country, India is still grappling for a stronghold when it comes to having more women in leadership positions on ground. It is therefore iconic to note that according to the World Economic Forum, women account only for 13.8% of board directors from listed companies in India, as against 86% of men. And this is the truth about women in leadership positions, on the C-suite levels, etc. With me at the table, and it would be great if you all could wave as I call out your name. The speakers present with us here today, we have Sharmila Khan, Director, HRBP from Micron Technology Operations India LLP. We have Padma Prasad, Director, Finance Digital Transformation from Honeywell. We have Naveen Narayanan, Chief Human Resource Officer from Biocon Biologics. We have Vandana Dogra, Associate Director, Integration and Digital Solutions, Diversity Hire Program Manager from Incture Technologies. We have Grace Samson, India Head, Vice President, Human Resources from Informatica Business Solutions. And we have Ritika Khullar, leading DEI for APAC from Uber. And while it's absolutely awe-inspiring to have them at the table, I'm also now going to pass the baton on to them to introduce themselves, once before we move to the question, which is, why do you, dear leaders, think corporate India needs more women leaders at the table amongst us, on boards of companies and in the C-suite levels? Shall we begin with Sharmila?
Hi, morning, everybody. And thank you, Kajal, for the great introduction and setting the tone. I represent Micron Technology, and I'm based out of Hyderabad. It's still a relevant topic, even though this topic, has been in discussion for several years, and glad to be part of this discussion. And looking forward to some interesting insights from all of you.
Although, did you want to also add why you think corporate India needs more women leaders?
Yeah, sure. So if you look at, I mean, you kind of highlighted very nicely, Kajal, that our representation at the leadership position for women is about 13%. But if you look at our success rate with women engineers passing out from universities is about 30% plus, right? So what's happening when these women are joining the organizations and where are they getting lost, right? So in every company, and it's not a new topic, DI is not a new topic in our environment. I think India has been very aggressive, and all the organizations, the participating organizations here will highlight the journey that all of them have done in the DI space. India has been having a very razor focused on the gender mix from the past, 2 decades, and despite having to have a very good success rate at the entry level, we are able to retain them at the mid level. But now the bigger question is, even after 20 years, all of us associated with this industry, where is the leak happening and why we're not able to kind of build that pipeline at the leadership level? So it's a very relevant question. There is no response, but I'm looking forward to kind of hear some insights and some interesting conversation on the same topic. And I think all of us have perspective about why the loss is and where the loss is.
Thanks, Sharmila. Can we hear from you, Naveen?
Sure. First thing, good morning. My name is Naveen. I take care of HR for Biocon Biologics based out of Bangalore. Joined pretty recently, about 6 months back. Prior to that, largely in the tech world for the last 15 years, worked in a few other industries as well. To the question, I probably want to answer it as a flavor to say why are women leaders? Why should companies be equal, right? And that includes leadership or across the board. I'll probably try to see that there's a flavor to it in the pharma business as well. The first thing I believed is that when we see research that happens, and finally when products reach patients, I call it something called as empathy in science that is required. And we do find to say that wherever we have teams that are fairly equal, we find the nature of research that comes out and the nature of products that come out seem to be reflective of how the communities will adopt it finally, right? So there are obvious disadvantages if an all-men crew try to find products which are going to be relevant to women, in just how they use it or otherwise. Two is that in my industry, the pharma industry, ethics and governance are very critical. And research again showed in 2009 in a different industry where the banks which were led by women actually survived the 2009 crisis or did far better than banks that had a lot more men. And we see that again in my company as well, where now I see it still as an outsider in view to say that the governance levels are far different. My third perspective on this topic is probably, I probably view it as more masculine traits and feminine traits, because we could hire a ton of women and we could claim ourselves to be equal. But if it's not an inclusive environment where women are allowed to and have the space to probably express their all traits that are there. It's also, obvious in all leadership research now to say that leaders who make it to the top are the ones who develop a lot of feminine traits, which is aspects of collaboration or empathy and connection of purpose higher than profit. Very relevant again to my industry, right? Which is purpose needs to be far better than profit. That's to me, I guess, the business case, the what's in it for me, and why probably if we didn't have an equal representation, leadership or otherwise, businesses will struggle or will not do to their potential. That's my perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Naveen. Couldn't agree more. Grace, can we hear from you? For those of you who have just joined us, we are having a round of introductions and also discussing why corporate India needs more women leaders. Yes, Grace.
Thank you, Kajal, and very happy morning, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be here to talk about one of this most relevant topics, I think, of all seasons. We've been talking about diversity and women all along, right? And I think, so before we get to the topic, a quick introduction about myself, in addition to what Kajal's already done. I work for Informatica, and a little bit about Informatica. I've been there for about 4 years now. Prior to that, worked for IBM for about 14 years, and overall about 26 years in the HR space. And talking about Informatica, we are into enterprise data management, and data really seems to be the new fuel, of corporates and organizations. So we deal with all things data, and this pandemic has really taught the world how crucial and important data is, and very happy to be in this space where we feel most wanted at this point. Now to Kajal's question of why do we need more women in the corporate space? I would say we've come a long way, especially Indian corporates, right? Where we initially started off with saying, why not women? And we've really traveled this journey now where we're talking about why not more women in the corporate space, right? And I think that's a commendable journey, though it may not be at the pace that we may all love to for it to be, but I think the journey has been immense, and of course we see more and more women participating. Now, why do corporates need women? A very simple fact, right? And taking the example of the current pandemic as well, we can see more and more women who are our clients, right? So if our customers and clients are diverse, then it's only fair that we have a lot more diversity in corporates to solution for client ask. Apart from a diverse pool, a larger pool, apart from productivity and some of the elements Naveen touched upon, I personally think because we have more and more online shoppers, which are women, even if we consider the pandemic and beyond, I think it's very important to have diverse thinking within corporates, diverse solutions for all the products that we ship to our clients who are very much diverse. That's from me, Kajal. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Can we hear from you, Padma?
Yeah, so thank you so much. And I'm Padma Prasad. I'm basically a chartered accountant. So I'm already feeling that I'm one of those diverse in this group, which is basically the HR group. I'm very much interested in hearing each other's perspectives here. So I work for Honeywell and I drive digital transformation in finance. So if you ask me, why do we need women in the corporate world? To me, in finance, the answer is very simple. You really have a large population in finance who does all the transaction entries and all the books close, or be it costing, management reporting, financial reporting, audit. So when you have to handle all of these team members, women by nature are very empathetic, and they can actually build relationships. So you can actually take the entire group forward and work with everybody more efficiently, understand the shoes of your customers or stakeholders in terms of what do they want from you as an organization when you are in the nature of setting up everything for them and then doing. Plus, if you see transformation as a separate industry, women by nature are very, very transformational. So whether it is month-end close that you're burning the midnight oil, you quickly want to find a solution in terms of how do I get this done much faster? How do I get this done much efficient? How do I go back home? Right? And you don't want to do a lot of this weekends because you also feel that, can I do something more productive? And costing, budget management, that comes naturally for, I would say, women in finance, because you are very particular about whether it is personal or whether it is professional. This is the money that is given. How do I make the best out of it within that? So all of that, if you see, women leaders in finance actually make very, very good. And in terms of corporate, if you see, yes, they bring in a very different perspective. And they can actually thrive on uncertain situations as well. So that's why I believe that this topic is very close to me.
Thank you so much for that, Padma. Vandana, can we hear from you?
Hey, Kajal, thanks so much. Hi, everyone.
Sorry, I'm just going to quickly interject. For those of you who have just joined us, which are a number of you, this is just to let you know that we are at the table with discussing places of rising women leaders, and you can see these amazing panelists in front of you from the kind of brands that they represent. They are talking to us about why corporate India needs more women leaders. Sorry about that, Vandana. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Kajal. Good morning. Hi, everyone. I'm Vandana. So I lead the integration practice at Incture besides handling the diversity and hire program. Thank you so much, Jobs for Her, for having me here. I feel really proud, privileged, and honored to be a part of this conversation with such esteemed panel of achievers. For me, this is the first time that, I'm speaking in such a forum. So yeah, really look forward to listening to all of you and getting your perspectives. So unlike most of the people here, till about last year, I was trying to overcome a battle with myself on how to get back to the corporate world after a career break. So I'd taken a break for almost close to 7 years to give my growing children the much needed time in their formative years, a phase I truly and thoroughly enjoyed and a journey I'm so very proud of. So both my daughters today are national level junior tennis players. The older one is playing the junior ITFs as well. And I'm surprised with where I am today, and I'm here representing my organization, Incture, at this large forum. Thanks, Incture, for giving me this opportunity to lead the diversity program alongside my business goals. This is something I'm so very passionate about because, I have been through a different journey altogether. So diversity and inclusion initiatives are core to Incture's corporate strategy, and we have been walking the talk when it comes to various diversity initiatives that we've taken as an organization. So coming to the question, Kajal, on why you think corporate India needs more women leaders. So going by the research, around the globe, if you look, business settings with diverse leadership, they're more creative, progressive, inclusive, and stable. What do women bring to the table? I think we're natural at empathy, collaborative spirit, better conflict resolution, multitasking, diversity of thought. I think it's great. I just see 7 years back and the time now, post-pandemic, it's really been a game changer for women. It's wonderful to see organizations investing in diversity and inclusion. I also feel that it's really important for corporate India to, invest in women leaders because they are the role models. And I'm sure all of us sitting here, are going to be the role models for people who are listening to us and who are aspiring to be women leaders. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for having me here and listening to my perspective as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vandana. Before I have Ritika wrap this question up for us, I'd like to quickly remind our viewers that you can put in questions for any of our panelists in the chat, and we will look at getting them answered, whether it's about rising in your own career, whether it's a question about their careers. Feel free to put it in the comments, and you can even address a particular question to any of our panelists, and I will take that up at the end of the session. Yes, Ritika, can we have you wrap up this question alongside your introduction as to why does corporate India need more women leaders?
Sure. Thanks, Kajal. And first of all, congratulations to you and to Jobs for Her for putting together such a stellar panel and such a burning topic. I'll talk about what stands out for me. I started my career about, I think, 20 years back in telecom, and I was in product marketing. I remember when I used to go and survey customers directly, we still had girls who were not allowed phones by their parents. Or if they had their phones, they had to be checked by the brother in the family or another man in the family. What stood out for me when I was doing this research, that nobody else had found this out so far. When women are part of your decision-making process, products, solutions, services by design are more inclusive. Look at what's happening today in e-commerce. Look at what's happening today in metaverse. Somebody goes to a metaverse and her virtual avatar gets harassed within seconds of joining the metaverse. Voice assistants today, are made to have these feminine voices, and they're flirting almost with the customers. Fintech, you launch something and then you discover that you have hardly any women in your customer base. I'm going to offer that any organization, if they're ambitious, if they're really aggressive, if they really want to dominate the market, you are not going to be successful if you do not have women in these key top roles. And that is why this matters to me.
Thank you, Ritika. Thank you so much. With that, I did put a note up in chat, but feel free to keep your questions ready, dear audience, about anything that you'd like to discuss about breaking the bias, which is this year's theme for International Women's Day, about your career, rising in it, or any of the careers of our esteemed panelists at the table. All right, and I'm going to come around the table now with a little more in-depth questions for each of our panelists, and I'll begin with Padma Prasad. Padma, what do you think are the factors that hinder a woman's career, and how can corporate India help her in not just her, maybe even the mindsets that we have in and around us in breaking those gender stereotypes?
It's a great question, Kajal. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to take that up. So in terms of, I'll split this question into two. Right? So the first one being, what are the factors that hinders? So in my mind, I'll speak from my own career. There are two things. One is your inner game and one is your outer game. Right? So if we have to focus on the inner game, it's mostly around your self-beliefs. What do you believe that you are capable of doing, and how far you can actually go, and how much do you really want to go ahead and start looking at what are the choices that you will make consciously, and what is the guilt system that you are getting into, right? So by nature, you look for conformity. So if you're really looking for conformity, there's a lot that you're not going to be allowed to do or be able to do, right? So where do you want to break that and then say that this is what I want to do for myself? This is how I want to jot down my career. And what is the goal plan that you put it across, and how resilient you are in terms of conforming to your plan and then making sure that you are able to take your steps in order to meet that. So in doing all of this, what's more important for women, I also believe, is the well-being. I also do a lot of life coaching and well-being sessions. So one of the things is how do you manage your energies? Because a woman by nature, if you see, there is a lot that is expected out of you. Sometimes I have felt that I feel overwhelmed trying to do this role, and you want to do justice to everything, right? But it is not going to be possible at the end of the day. You're going to burn yourself out much before you even look at, middle career or something. So how do you actually make yourself energized, and how do you actually balance it so that you are able to do a little bit of everything that makes you feel passionate? So that's about your inner game, I would say, that you will have to really win over your inner game and then give your languaging and self-belief system to yourself. When it comes to the outer game, it is more on, what does the society think, your biases. I have gone through it many times. So 20 years back, I could relate to what Ritika said. 21 years back, when I launched myself into the first time career into a factory, people looked at me like, you're the only girl who's going to work in this factory. And I felt like, oh my God, what is happening to me? So that's bad. It was in finance, because, finance typically means you work long hours and then you work over the weekends, you're round the clock during month end close, quarter end close, and then women are not the natural choices for such roles. But how do you actually turn that to your advantage? Fine, let me be the only woman, but I'm going to do something very different that it has not happened until now. So look at every, I would say, limitation or possibility as your opportunity. Turn that into your opportunities and then make sure that none of these factors are actually hindering in your career. And when you make choices, how do you make peace with those choices? Because there are certain conscious choices that we make, right? That I had to slow down my career. I had to let go of my audit careers where I need to travel out, etc. when I had to take care of my child. So when you do that, make peace with it. Otherwise, it's not going to allow you to be more energetic and then come forward for a better career. And in terms of corporate India, I would say that we need to have much more inclusive work environment. If we don't have that work environment, it's not going to be possible for women leaders to actually naturally cherish and then kind of, come a long way in the career. And in terms of your policies, there are certain necessities, right? Women usually prefer a little bit of flexibility around the hours, not because she wants to work less for the organization, but because she has to probably go pick her kid from the daycare, make sure that the other person who is taking care of the children are relieved, right? So there is a reason behind why women need certain flexibility around in the office environment or the organization. And organization should be open enough to look at all those women-friendly policies, give their leadership mentoring or coaching so that women is actually able to bring out the best in her potential. So that's my humble perspective.
Sure, lovely. Thank you, Padma. It was insightful to see the various touch points you covered in terms of this question. On that same question, can we also hear from you, Vandana, as to what are the factors that you think hinder a woman's career and how can corporate India help in breaking that gender stereotype?
Yeah, so talking about the factors that hinder a woman's career, I feel they are different for different women. Most of the time, like in my 17 years of professional career, I have seen that the reasons are mostly personal, events like motherhood, marriage, taking care of elderly parents. You will always find, that the women are the ones who are actually taking the backseat when it comes to such events in their life and their careers, right? So you don't see men doing much of those, having those much of career breaks. And you'll also find that when we women are, not able to maintain that work-life balance, we start questioning ourselves. Now, everybody doubts themselves at some point or the other, but letting that stop you is a choice that you make. And I think it's okay to kind of take a pause, but to stop is not okay. I mean, it's okay not to give 100% of time. There have been times when, my daughter is not well and I have a release in the office and, my heart and mind is divided between the two. And then I tend to kind of self-question myself whether I'm doing the right thing. And, you get that feeling of guilt. I'm sure all the working mothers go through that at some point or the other. So don't let that stop you. The only time you fail is when you completely stop. You got to move away from the familiar, the normal norms, that are set out there by the society. And besides, these personal battles that we always fight while we're working, the policy, the culture of the organization, that also impacts women growth. So there is always, I feel, some unwillingness in employers to invest long-term in women because, they perceive that women may quit their jobs in due course of time. Gender pay disparity, then fewer promotion opportunities. These are all barriers when it comes to our growth, right? So there's no secret that gender stereotype do exist. It's not just in corporate industry, it's almost everywhere. And we don't make it to the finishing line due to this unconscious bias, belief, stereotype that exists in corporate world. These default perceptions must go. So it's really important for organization to invest in healthy gender diversity ratio. At Incture, we are walking the talk. Our gender diversity ratio as of today is 40:60. In the last 6 months, since I'm heading the diversity program there, we've hired close to 60 women employees through the various returnship programs. We have also bootstrapped our new location, new digital engineering centers through these returnship hires. We have women leaders handling some of the largest portfolios in our organization. By the way, Incture is also UN Women Empowerment Principles signatory. So these principles offer guidance to business on how to promote gender equality and women empowerment in workplace. So these principles are established by UN Global Compact and UN government. Having a greater representation of women in management and leadership is not just a diversity score or a target or a box, which needs to be ticked. We've got to work on it. And I also want to use this forum to give a big shout out to the spouses of defense forces. So since I'm running this returnship program, we also have a specialized program for the spouses of defense forces. So please, in case, any one of you who is a spouse of a defense force and is watching this program, reach out to us. I come from an army background. I have seen the journey of these women closely during my growing up years. I mean, they're highly qualified women who leave their careers, just to support their husbands. And these soldiers are safeguarding the nation, right? So we at Incture really strongly stand by them, and we are on a mission to engage with them and help them become women in technology. So need of the hour is also to address gender pay parity, disparities, standardized pay, and also have regular checks and audits around it. That is really important. It's also important to sensitize men towards, women, especially when they're coming back from maternity leave. They look for psychological safety. When, you come back from a break, especially after a childbirth, I think it's really important to invite men to be a part of this conversation. Build awareness amongst them, create alliances, foster a diversity perspective within the group, not just among women. It's also important to break the conflicting policies. So, I've also seen that, there are companies who have these sabbatical leaves, right? And, when you're going on a sabbatical leave, I've seen that some candidates are also penalized in their appraisal and their growth is hampered. That's a little conflicting, because on one side you have the policy and on the other side you're impacting their growth because they're going on a long break. I think all that needs to change, And the fact is that remote working is a reality now, and it is definitely a game changer for women. It's been an equalizer, at least for me, it's kind of worked. And this has really been validated by the business outcome in this pandemic era, that it's really working well. So supporting women in senior roles by mentoring, upskilling, reskilling, having growth plan in place for them. This is extremely crucial to see, women rising up the ladder. So what is the key strategy here? It is to prioritize mentoring of women. And mentors are really, really critical, because they can help aspiring women to gain perspective and build our connections and network. Organizations also need to have training around unconscious bias. So I'd like to conclude by calling out to organizations and people for greater empathy, understanding, support for breaking these barriers of gender disparities. The fact that you're a woman, I think that's your biggest superpower. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vandana. Again, some great perspectives there. I know Grace wanted to share something on this as well. Grace, did you have something to say?
Yeah, so very quickly, in addition to what Padma and Vandana really talked about, right? I think while the corporate world and the entire ecosystem can be very supportive, but by nature as human beings, whenever a woman or even male for that matter, when we think the ecosystem is not conducive, we by nature will make a shift, right? So bottom line, what I'm trying to say here is one important message to all women who may be here or watching this recording at a later point is, we tend to load our baskets continuously, right? And never think about offloading a few things. Right. And to Padma's earlier point of, can we make peace with ourselves in terms of what we want to let go? Because that seems to be a primary hindrance, according to me, for women to really grow, because you want, a piece of the pie and to be part of everything possible. I think that could be one of those biggest deterrents personally to me, and I keep advocating to my team at least to say, all of us are great at having a to-do list, but we also must master the art of having this not to-do list, right? And when you have the not to-do list, you exactly know what you need to do, right? And that's the only point I wanted to weigh in here, Kajal. Thank you.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Grace. I think women hold themselves to the highest levels of perfection, and sometimes that, many times actually, that becomes the deterrent in being able to do what they set out to do. And with that, I'd like to come to Naveen to share, his perspective, and also have a male voice in the conversation. Naveen, how do you think we should ensure that equal treatment is given to candidates for leadership positions that that are not hindered by the gender bias.
Awesome. Never thought that I would be the diversity in the group, but like Padma said, we all try to, I think, either try to fit in or try to find what we are diverse on. A few things, I guess, I love some of the things that Grace and Padma mentioned. Adding on to some of it, I guess, is one is, I guess, the good organizations over time have looked at something which is just equitable practices, because that's where some of the start of all the rewards and growth and everything else happens, which is primarily, I mean, it still stays on merit, which is always a dilemma, right? It's a very thin line in terms of how meritocratic it is. But things like, for example, on performance, I mean, a lot of companies follow different forms of bell curve and different forms of allocation that's there. Now, has there been an equitable representation of women in that? Because if you miss that, then for the next 1 year, you're on a slippery slope anyway. Is there equitable representation in learning programs, for example? The dilemma kind of comes in is to saying that if you don't have it. Now, if you don't have it, do you include them for the sake of the number? Or do you say that this is meritocratic and that's it, right? Because then for a year, you've pretty much lost and you've gone down on a slope. Those are a little bit of the hard decisions probably to make. I've seen companies to do this as well, which is in positions, in all positions, they try to insist on equal resumes. There has to be a 50-50 and that is presented to the hiring manager. Some even do this, which is to try and blank out and blind resumes as well, which allows, now that could be within, that could be within hiring as well, where you're doing this, especially when you feel that there are biases that exist in certain areas in general, right? There are stereotypes that exist to say women cannot be in sales roles or women cannot be in manufacturing roles. It's a man's domain. And the best way to break some of those could be some of these practices that are there. But I'm a big fan of the first part that I said, which is how do you ensure equitable practices in the upstream kind of processes that are there. My addition to what Grace and Padma mentioned, and especially what Grace mentioned around some of the talent practices, is somewhere what happens is we all know, I think, over the 10-15 years, women, one, probably at times take a break. Two is they are sometimes trailing spouses. Sometimes there is the career is, unwittingly probably the second, in the family and so on and so forth. One of the things that we are experimenting is to saying that should women be judged on potential and a man be judged on performance? It's a dilemma, and it's a worthwhile debate as well. Why? Because once you come to a particular place, the place where you are trying to ask this question is to say, why don't we have leaders? When you look at two resumes and you say, oh, this guy has done 20 years, he's gone abroad, he's done this, he's done that, and the woman equivalent probably has 15, 17 years, has not gone abroad, has not done X, Y, Z, and so on. The question deeper to think through is why, right? And the trail of that answer comes in the 10, 15 years. And if we every time keep comparing people on those equal parameters, I think we're setting ourselves for failure, right? As just companies, and it won't work in my view. It is a provocative thought. How far do you stretch it is probably a big question as well in terms of potential versus it. I think it works very well for internal. I think it definitely works very well for internal growth, internal promotions, and some of those aspects that is there. That's probably the only way that I have found so far to try and keep bringing back balance, right? I mean, I call it the pink ladder. No stereotype to the color, but I think there needs to be that flip at various points that are provided, because otherwise the system will always try to keep pushing things backwards that are there. My last comment that is there is because you asked me as a man, I would say this, which is to say, we all never grew in equal homes, equal societies, right? And suddenly we come to a company and we try to behave equal, right? And I think that's the biggest fallacy that we have, which is to say, a bit like what some of the stories that people said on their homes, or the phones being monitored. We all grew in very unequal homes or unequal, so we still have unequal societies, I guess, probably getting worse in some parts of it for sure. How do we break that? I mean, I don't know whether just an unconscious bias training and a few other things will suddenly change the person who has 30, 40 years of some ingrained inequality that is already there, and suddenly I'm the senior leader and now I have to behave equal, inclusive, and various other aspects. Not easy, in my view, not easy. I think it is also to do, I mean, I'm not saying this only for men. I think it's also to do with women as well. Great example is probably, I mean, extrapolate what happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. More than 1/3 of American women didn't want to vote for a woman president. Because they think that a woman cannot be good enough as a president, right? They still believe that. So I think we all have biases. I think the question is, how do we, there's a lot of deep work that organizations need to do around this if they really want to have inclusive environments or inclusive leaders around it.
Yes, absolutely, Naveen. Some thought-provoking insights, and there's some questions that I think we all need to ask ourselves, our organizations. It's also about turning the question within as to what biases exist in our own mindsets, before we move into organizations and societies. But of course, it's dialogues like these that kind of push us to ask those questions to ourselves, to our organizations. It is dialogues like these that surface and bring to the fore what's not working, how to change it, and how we can continue to push those boundaries that, as you rightly pointed out, society will continue to draw around us all. Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have a couple of really great questions that have come in, and I will take them up very shortly. But coming to Sharmila, Sharmila, can you, furthering on this, can you tell us what policies or initiatives do you think can be beneficial for a woman's growth when we are talking about changes within the organization?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Before I do that, I just want to go back and comment on Naveen's observation about team members who have spent 30, 35 years in the organization, and how do they come around and change those biases? And they may be willing, may they not be willing, but I think there is no choice, and there should be no choice in the first place. And just to kind of draw everybody's attention towards the central theme that we're talking about is how do we make sure that we have reasonable representation at the top, which is very thin at this point in time. There are two ways to look at it. One is what you can do and one organization can do. So this I will just break it into two parts, because what you can do is what all of you have talked about, breaking your own inhibitions, reaching out, celebrating your own success. Women shy away in celebrating their own success. You go to LinkedIn, anybody who's getting promoted or got some accolades, you'll find men flashing it, right? And double tweeting it. You will very seldom, you kind of do a very simple dipstick survey and you'll find very few women who will actually flash their promotions or accolades that they would have received. So you can see the pattern on the LinkedIn, right? Because they shy their achievements and they could potentially be overachievers. So something that I think it's a little bit inbuilt. We need to just get out of it. I mean, that's very personal in nature, but what organization can do, and that's what your question is, Kajal. I look at, in the context of Micron, we have made a huge shift around the DEI, and our lens is not limited to gender. Especially in the pandemic period, DEI has become far more pronounced. And it has gone beyond the gender lens. We have been very proactive in adopting some of the practices that are very progressive in nature, and it is around LGBTQ. We have some very specific concerted efforts towards ensuring that we are hiring people with different abilities. And we consciously went and partnered with universities and partnered with the experienced, with a company like yours, Jobs for Her for that matter. We kind of doubled up our efforts in order to attract women who have taken break and looking to come back. And what can organization do, in order to, with respect to the practices and policies, what intervention? I think we have figured out that, and it's an undisputed question, that do we need women at the top? I don't think so. We are really should be debating this question. Right? We have spent 20 years in this industry, and this topic has been there for long. But I think what we should be discussing, and the operating question is how organization can make sure that I'm not losing out that talent elsewhere, or just losing out the talent as is to the society, because these women who have gained experience are either not coming back or becoming entrepreneur. Right, so two things that are happening. And I think in pandemic, what we see is while the representation of the gender particularly has increased, even other aspect of the diversity has increased because of the flexibility, because of flexible work arrangement. People can work remote, they can work from wherever they want to, they can work whenever they want to, right? So as a result of that, there is a spike in the representation. But what has happened is there is a burnout, there is a fatigue because of, we are breaking those barriers between the timings. Everybody talks about the burnout. Now we are talking about the wellness, which we did not talk about before pandemic, right? So from a practices and policies perspective, I'll speak on behalf of Micron. We have doubled our efforts around wellness, and some of our leave policies, some of our initiatives have doubled up around wellness to make sure that we're now forcing through the structure, right? We have a wellness leave, we have a wellness week. As we speak, we will be celebrating Wellness Week in the week of 9th, and every day we will be doing some interventions, some activities in order to celebrate the topic of wellness so that it becomes a part of the daily jargon. It is not just HR celebrating wellness. It actually needs to be felt by every single employee in the organization, and it is much necessary for a gender specifically. I look at flexible work model as one of the most relevant benefit, which would promote diversity at all levels. I think that piece is going to be the game changer. Because it will allow women particularly to be able to balance their work and life. Given that you can work from, and now we are evolving as a company, we are introducing hybrid model, we are introducing remote models, we are introducing, if you wish to work from the site full time, you're welcome to do so. I think these benefits would immensely help organizations and organization of our size and scale, particularly to be able to ensure that we are becoming far more inclusive when it comes to that diversity piece. Second thing I want to talk about, I think somebody talked as well about the pay parity. Equal pay is one of the very important vector at Micron. We actually run a pay equity exercise annually. After the entire pay cycle is done, once all the managers have made the recommendations, we actually run the pay parity. And it is done by third-party companies so that we cannot manipulate, and they provide us the report, and this report is directly represented to our CEO of the company, just to make sure that none of these biases, right? Because I think Vandana talked about, if I'm taking a sabbatical, would I be penalized, right? And if I'm a woman, I took a break for 7 years or 8 years and I'm coming back, am I being marginalized? So some of these exercises that we do, which we call it as an equal pay, and we run those anomalies to make sure, is there any unconscious bias, creeping into the process? So that's one activity I take really pride in making sure that we are not missing it, even if we're missing it at the top level. But when we do this a clinical, check and balances, we are eliminating those biases as well. A third thing that I would like to talk about is having to have a flexible, medical plan, which suits all types of genders. And we introduced last year a very special program if somebody is looking to change their gender by choice, right? And that will be reimbursed by the organization. That's part of our medical program. Surrogacy is also as a part of our medical benefit. And we have taken very aggressive steps in order to make sure that we are encompassing all types of the needs within the organization. Then we also have 4-5 ERGs, especially at Micron India. Overall, Micron globally, we have 9 ERGs, which is employees resources groups. They are very, very essential and central in driving our DEI agenda. DEI cannot be your CEO agenda. It cannot be HR agenda. It has to be felt by the employees and every single employee in the organization. So we have very active participation to these employee resource groups. And one of them is capability, which is about team members who come with the different abilities within the organization. They have an opportunity to connect together. They talk to each other and they lean on each other to understand and share their pain. So that's something that's very powerful at Micron. And the last thing that I want to talk about is allyship. So I personally think as the most powerful vector, and the reason why I say that is, we all grew up, right? We all believe that working hard is very essential for our success. But I believe some section of the people have to work harder than others, right? And that's where the allyship has to happen. And if we have those male allies in the organization, they will be able to empathize and extend that support to people who are looking to have that additional support. It's not that they're not working hard, but they're working harder than others, and they are looking to have additional support. So I think that's where our allyship at Micron is very special and dear to me, particularly as HR lead and also as an active partner with the DEI. But these are some of the things I believe would be very helpful to make sure not just we are maintaining the numbers, but we are ensuring that we're creating a highly inclusive environment within the organization.
Wow, great to know, Sharmila. Some amazing initiatives in there, and for calling out whether it's the gender bias or equality across the various issues that do come up in society and of course within an organization. With that, I'd like to talk to Ritika about taking this to the next level. What measures do you think, Ritika, need to be taken to call out gendered assumptions and unconscious biases at any and every level of an organization?
Thanks, Kajal. And I love that question because what you're talking about, and this is something I think that Naveen pointed out, briefly, is that you cannot just work at an individual level. You cannot just work at changing people's mindsets. How do you embed this so structurally and so systemically in every part of the talent process that it's no longer left to whether or not you've been able to transform the individual? So I'm going to talk about 4 things that I think organizations must do in my own experience, working in this space for so many years now. The first one is what I call structural barriers. Think of this as lack of access to important informal networks. Most organizations that I have worked with, they have very long-standing informal networks, smoke breaks, cricket match on the weekends. Sometimes it's even trips to Thailand for doing exactly what you think that they want to do. Now, I have seen that sometimes men assume that women don't want to take part of some of these events and they don't invite them. I've also seen that mostly women also don't wish to participate. Now, how does it make difference to your career? It excludes the women from these power circles in their organization. And now, in every organization, you do have somewhat ambiguous expectations for promotion as well. Along with your competencies, skills, experience, There are some parameters that will influence your career growth, such as how's your rapport with seniors. And I think, Naveen, you mentioned very interestingly that has somebody traveled abroad, but have you looked at the questions, the reasons behind that question? So guess who loses out when you're navigating your career growth when faced with these structural barriers? So what can companies do? They can actually create artificial access to these networks. You could have your own version of mentoring circles, lean-in circles, and I think Sharmila called them allies. At Uber, we call them sponsors. Having people in power use their social capital in the organization to influence career outcomes for their sponsees. The second thing that I want to look at is institutional mindsets. Those of you who are from the OD space or the HR space, if you will just think for a moment, you will see that most people will associate leadership behaviors with very agentic behaviors rather than community behaviors like investing and building in a team. So agentic behaviors are associated with stereotypical masculine traits: assertiveness, ability to command a room, aggression, competitiveness, dominance. Now, what does this do? It creates a conflict for women when they actually attain leadership positions, because on one hand, they're expected to act like the leader, which are often considered masculine traits, and at the same time conform to the gender expectations as well and display feminine traits. Somebody gave a very good example with Hillary Clinton and what happened there. So organizations, what can we do? We need to check for inclusive language so that our leadership competencies are not defined in a way that's unconsciously masculine coded, and so that men are automatically deemed more appropriate for these roles. What's the third thing? The third thing is, the socio-cultural expectations that are rooted in our social fabric. It is considered more appropriate for women to interrupt their careers to attend to family responsibilities. Almost everybody on this panel, spoke about this, but can we just take a moment to acknowledge the fact that it's just assumed that caring for the home, children, aging parents, a sick family member, and so on, even if a woman is the primary breadwinner in a family, she's usually still the primary caregiver. It's not true for men. If a man is the primary breadwinner, he's rarely the primary caregiver. Now, this is the fabric that makes work-life balance also a very gendered conversation. So while the balance for men is like focus on your health, mental recovery, for women, it is, caregiving, domestic responsibilities. And this is, of course, what we call the double shift as well. And what aggravates this further is that ends up with women leaning towards fields that are lower paying, have fewer growth opportunities, or do not translate as seamlessly to CXOs. And I think Padma, Grace, Vandana, all three of you made a reference to this. So what can we do? Organizations need to have more than one template of success beyond the hustle and the grind, making sure that people who choose to flex in terms of where, how much, when they work, they're equally successful regardless of gender. That's critical. And I remember, Sharmila, you said that it's perhaps one of the most important determinants of whether or not your DEI policy will stick. I'll come to the last one, which is, what we often have heard as the challenge of onlys. Now, any team's transition from a homogeneous to a diverse team, it often involves the very initial uncomfortable step of having only one woman to begin with. Now, onlys tend to be isolated. Not only that, they're also more likely to experience gender discrimination, microaggressions, additional scrutiny about their work, and the pressure to perform. They're also unfortunately viewed by others as very symbolic gestures. Now, what can organizations do? Just beware of tokenism. There's a false perception that just because you have these 3 really strong women in power, all is well, and there is, equal opportunity for all to flourish because we've just taken care of any bias in the systems. So guard against this premature, misplaced celebration, because it creates a false sense of success and it eliminates the need to give this work the urgency that it deserves. So I'm going to summarize, by saying that companies, organizations, we need a deeper appreciation of these structural, institutional, and socio-cultural barriers, what they look like, and really enable systems and practices that make barriers irrelevant instead of only working at the individual level. Back to you, Kajal.
Thank you so much for that, Ritika. Again, that's quite a bit of research and analysis that you've put in there, and thank you for surfacing those insights. And now I'd like to come to Grace to wrap this up with the questions that we have for you, and then of course we have some really amazing questions that have come in from Jasi and from Anu and Reena in the chats, which I'd like to take up soon after this. So Grace, we've just about spoken of everything in terms of the organization, the woman in question, the environment. But sensitization programs for women alone will not suffice. We know that inclusion of male members is a step in the right direction. So what do you think corporate India can do? What more can corporate India do to foster male allies to ensure that we have equal participation of women at all levels?
Thank you, Kajal. And let me start from home, right? And a personal experience or example, right? Even as a child, I think I always drew my inspiration from my dad, who was a great motivator, right? To really instill that sense of purpose, to really instill that sense of dreaming big to win big, right? And as I kind of went along until today, a pillar of strength and support has always been my husband, right? And today I'm here talking about all of this because there's somebody in the background taking care of some things that, otherwise, would have been left unattended. So I've had this pillar of strength and support, from my husband. And of course, when I look at what is that sense of purpose meaning personally for me, it is also because my son takes a lot of pride in talking about my accomplishments, to say, Mama, I don't think I'd ever imagine you being, just at home doing nothing, because rather than you making dosas for me, I take a lot of pride if you are attending panel discussions out there and influencing a lot more women as a woman leader. So what I'm trying to really drive home as a point is the role of a male in a woman's success and leadership journey starts from home, right? And let's kind of graduate to the corporate space, especially in an Indian corporate space, right? And why do we need male allies? If I can just address that and then really move on very quickly to what can organizations do, right? Why? Because it's not really about men versus women. It is about men and women. And that is, a very key message that corporates need to drive to make sure workplaces, especially at the higher levels where, for example, I'm the only woman leader in Informatica India, right, in those boardroom conversations, to make sure those boardroom conversations are non-threatening, so we can further scale as women leaders, right? So driving home, that is very, very important. Plus, giving that very, very strong assurance to men that it's not having more and more women at leadership positions, and being allies is not a threat to their own growth, but it is otherwise. I think it's very important because they need to realize, organizations need to realize that together corporates will be stronger. right? Men and women. And that, I think is the primary essence of why we need male allies. Now, what can corporates really do to have that shift? Let me again quote examples of what we did at Informatica in the last 3.5 years that I've been here with Informatica, right? When I came in, did a quick dipstick when we looked at diversity and talked to most of the men to say, what do you do to really infuse more women into the corporate space, right? And men kind of felt like that was a personal attack, that question, right? To say, hey, I've not done anything to not have women in the team, right? Because it was understood otherwise. But where we were trying to drive is, have you done something consciously to infuse more women, right? And the responses were right from hiring examples where I get mostly male candidates profiles, and therefore I end up hiring more male candidates. But the question to them was, how about insisting on equal women profiles, right? And being open to it and very consciously making that effort. So I think it starts from there. And what has Informatica really done? Right from hiring to exit, we've had multiple interventions. And in the interest of time, very quickly, we've had inclusive interview panels, right? We've had a top-down approach in terms of how leaders at the top really started driving diversity, driving an inclusive culture, driving home this culture of belongingness and equality. And that has helped. When we say that, we have 2 slides in every all hands which talks about diversity, inclusion, equality, belonging. Because once we know that it is everybody's mission, and we are not just responsible but accountable for it, then naturally the needle starts moving, right? And apart from having inclusive interview panels and very focused approach in terms of hiring, infusing women at the leadership level, we also look at growth, transfers internally, and especially at senior positions, how can we really make that a reality? And of course, we've come a long way, I would say, where personal interventions are not required anymore in terms of compensation equality, because we already see that happening naturally in the system now, which is such a fantastic thing, right? We also have male allies who are change champions, right? We call them change champions, who are influencing this change at the ground level. So we have about 30 change champions, largely men, who drive home this message about how do we really be very effective male allies to really promote diversity, especially at the leadership level within Informatica and beyond. After all of this, when it comes to even looking at boomerangs and stuff like that, what we do is I personally meet up with every single woman who's exiting Informatica. While we have exit interviews that happen, but especially if it is a woman mid-level and above who's trying to make that career shift or that organization shift, then I personally need to understand what is the root cause and what's the way we could kind of help, right? Apart from this, we have regular randomly picked meetings with women who are of high potential, because in a virtual space, I think it's very, very important that women feel heard more often and in a very non-threatening environment, because there's a lot of situations where we're not very comfortable voicing our opinions to our higher ups. But when you have a neutral party just weighing in and listening to you, people are a lot more comfortable. And those findings in terms of those focus group conversations become reality, where we have charts during our all hands meetings where we say, this was your ask and this is what we've done. So when people look at outcomes and when they know that their voice matters, then there's a lot more, freedom, a lot more space to grow naturally. And most of it is done by the men in the organization, right? And that's really what I personally think men can do, and why really do we need male allies to really help women succeed in the organization. That's from me. Thank you, Kajal. Back to you.
Thanks, Mark, for those thoughts, Grace, and thanks everyone for pitching in with your ideas. I'm quickly looking for the questions that came in Jhansi has a question or two, I think, that she sent in. One of them is, what are those best practices implement at Incture? Vandana, this question is directed to you. For such a significant number of women returnees to come in.
You're on mute.
Yeah, may I know the name of the person who asked the question? I just missed that name.
Her name is
Jhansi.
Jhansi Jagannath.
Yeah, hi, Jhansi. Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm very comfortable answering that since I'm handling the returnship program at Incture. So we have different trails of this program. The first one is bring her back to work, and the second one is standing with our forces. And I mean, it's a well-structured program where, we have structured onboarding where, we understand that the women who have taken a break, they definitely cannot be at par with the, women who have been working in the industry all through. So we have, an internship period where we work on upskilling them, reskilling them, dual skilling them, understanding their strengths. So even our assessment, when we do the interviews, it is done with awe. That is assessment with empathy, because we completely understand there is a gap, and with the gap there comes a lack of confidence, which is understandable. But what we look at in these women is their attitude, their willingness to get back, and their aspirations. So that is where we support with this internship period of 3 to 6 months, where based on our assessment of these women, we work on their learning and development, and gradually we integrate them to our teams, and then make them into mainstream women in technology. So this is how we do it for Bring Her Back to Work. And standing with forces part, I had already spoken about it during our discussion. So that is the second trail of this program. So that's how we do it. And we've had an overwhelming response. As I told you, in the last 5-6 months, we've onboarded more than 60 women through this program. And, you'll not believe it, some of them have really surprised us with their potential. So we didn't have to really wait for that internship period to complete, because, they've really surprised us with the kind of results, and, they're already contributing to the business, to the customer, and to the success of the organization in a short span of time. So that's how it is.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Vandana. Jhansi also has another great question, and feel free, dear panelists, any of you, to take a stab at this. How are hiring managers trained to keep biases at bay when looking at hiring women returnees and unconventional roles? Any success stories? Can we hear from any of the other panelists?
I can probably respond to that. Yeah. So I think some of you talked about having to have unconscious bias training. We already have it. It's actually part of our yearly mandatory training for all our employees. So, and also we cover the microaggression, because what we do as part of this process is to create awareness. While you may be just kind of doing a checklist, I have to complete it, it's mandatory. But what is happening in the process, you are getting introduced to the whole concept. You're reading those sentences, those words are resonating with you. You're recognizing that I need to be conscious about my biases. So, for returnee programs, as Jhansi has talked about, manager sensitization is the most essential part in the whole process, because they are the one who are making the hiring decisions. And how do they keep these biases aside while they're making the hiring choices? Like I said, there is no straight response to that. It is a journey. It is a continuous journey, and there has to be continuous reminders through various programs and initiatives, and also holding our managers accountable. Returnee program cannot be carried or by only the talent acquisition or the HR. It needs to be carried out by the entire organization, and that's where the commitment has to happen. Creating a structure, not just like hiring people or ensuring that I'm able to attract as many number of people that I'm looking to hire. The success of the program will actually be measured by the kind of environment. Are you assimilating them well? If a woman is taking a break, what they lack is not the skill. What they lack is the confidence. right? So I think that's something that we have to build on, and that's where I'm a big proponent of ally program, and that's where they should be seeking such mentors and allyship to be able to kind of make sure they're assimilating well in the organization, creating initiatives around that so that they don't feel left out. You don't want to be in a situation where you have been able to attract the female candidate after a break through the returnee program, but you're not able to sustain them. I think both pieces have to go hand in hand to be able to make sure that you actually have a good success with the program.
Two, three things. One is just to amplify some of the things that Vandana mentioned. One of the reasons for the confidence dip, I guess, is the break also means now they're a little rusty on skills, and sometimes in tech worlds and some other places, things have moved on. More importantly, I think people have also moved on. So suddenly your peer group, now you're reporting in. I think the organizations which have managed this well, this how do you try to bridge those gaps, have also managed the confidence gap in some form beyond just skills. Because otherwise it's always hard to make that choice. One other new addition that's there, a company that I worked for a few years back, it's very obvious that in the India context, especially, the choice of the woman to come back sometimes is not necessarily hers alone, right? And a very large tech company that I worked for, we actually did this where we started coaching, the husband and the in-laws and everybody else to say it's equally important to get the woman back into work. It's good for her, it's good for your family, and so on and so forth. So sometimes, it's also trying to go a little more upstream to saying where does the actual decision lie, or who are the influencers to that decision, and how do you try to tweak that a bit. We actually had about thousands of calls made by an external firm who would do this counseling, and then we found many more who were willing to return back.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Sharmila and Naveen. We have another question which Anu has sent in, and while she was watching a movie, I don't know if you all have watched Mulan, there is a scene in that where I think the main character is being trained or groomed to be a man. So she wonders if in the leadership rungs, are we looking at women being groomed to be like a man?
I could possibly take that if you will, Kajal.
Thank
you. So the answer is no, right? And there could be different perspectives for sure. However, I think because if a woman tries to be like a man, then most of the solutions, interventions will be like a man. And so what is the cause of having diversity there, right? Is my first point. However, what it calls for is for women to be women, but to be unique. I think that's really, it's not about equal workplace. Yes, all of that's great. But as long as we are unique and bring to the table things that really drive and move the needle, we will definitely stand out and not, kind of blend in. And to me, I think that is my biggest personal experience, where I've always tried to be unique and not just replicate or be a copy of somebody else, right? Be it male or your other female colleagues. So I would personally say the answer is no. We don't need to be groomed to be like men. And of course, I think what we need to focus on is to be ourselves and strive to be unique, because each of us, I personally believe, are wired very differently.
If I may add, there is a term in the world of DEI that we use. It's known as covering. Covering was a term that was initially used by the LGBTQ folks who did not want to come out, or people with a disability who did not want to be identified as such. A lot of times when women fall into this trap of masculinization, that is really covering. And there are costs to covering in terms of, lower scores in inclusion, belonging, psychological safety, mental and emotional well-being. And therefore, if you see somebody even giving you, and women get a lot of subjective feedback, which is not backed by data. if somebody gives you any feedback / well-intentioned mentoring advice that falls into this category, please do not take this advice. So that's for the women to know as well.
Very well said. Very well said. We actually publish in sales and a few other so-called stereotypical masculine professions. I actually publish on a regular basis to say, and we interestingly have women who outperform men consistently. And I just leave the data out there for the men to absorb it. And I'm assuming that that's how some of the change also kind of works through. But I think Ritika said it well before as well, which is space for masculine and feminine traits.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, feminine in the masculine and masculine in the feminine, having intertwined and woven in each other and not necessarily looking at them in singularity. Great points. We do have another question that's come in, and I think, Naveen, this was something that you said about promoting men for performance and women for potential. Can you elaborate a bit on that? This question has come in from an erstwhile HR professional, and she'd like to know how do organizations hold this alongside a high-performance meritocracy-based culture?
I said that it's a philosophy. The first thing is you have to adopt it to say whether it's a philosophy that you would adopt both at hiring, growth, and various other spaces. Two is it needs a lot of dialoguing on a consistent basis, because the constant pushback that you would get is to say whether is it meritocratic and this is not equal, or sometimes it could seem like it is quota based than anything else. But I also came back to the story to say that when you have two people who are there, and you'll always have the example that I gave was you'll always have years and this and various usual visible criteria that are there. There are times when always the women stands to lose out because of those reasons, right? So I mean, I'm not even going into some of the informal networks. Ritika mentioned this to saying, oh, you didn't hang out, I don't know you well, and some of those aspects that could be there. It's just resume to resume. Even more so if a AI-based system is going to pick it, it's going to be even more, going to backfire in that sense. That's the spot which I feel where organizations should think this through to saying, should women be hired on? Now, should women be probably given the same opportunity, but only on potential? I'll probably go back to what even Vandana mentioned on this, where she said she was surprised at returning mothers. My data consistently shows that the desire for a mother to come back and prove herself, that fire and passion that is there, she will always outperform, in my view, right? And so I'm personally not surprised when that happens, and which is the precise reason why I feel that this debate has to be in the organization, and we're trying to look at that as well, as we grow in our own journey.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Naveen. We do have another gentleman saying, thoughts on breaking the legacy of products or services built in the past which didn't necessarily have good inclusive elements. We believe that it requires a relook as women lead more consumer-based and other areas. Yes, thank you for your thoughts, Pradeep. And as we come to the end of this roundtable, I'd just like to go around and see if anyone has any closing thoughts to share before we call it a wrap.
Yeah, I could probably just start and others can contribute. I think we talked about this feminine and masculine. I think they just have to coexist. And that's what the inclusivity is all about. And, as long as our conversations are pivoting towards the inclusion environment, I think we'll be highly successful to be able to create a far more, better environment for our colleagues, not just from the single gender lens, but other aspects of diversity. And I believe every single organization, participating companies are doing fantastic in their own spaces. And really great to hear everybody's perspective on the topic. And there's a lot that we can learn from each other. We don't have to really, create something, but if we can get our basics right and, leverage what we have, and kind of leverage some of the best practices that all of you have, would be a great win for all of us.
I would just
Thank
say
you,
that,
Sharmila. Yes, please go ahead,
become
Padma.
what you think. So basically, whatever you want to become, you think that. Be yourself, be unstoppable, and please reach out for help. Because sometimes, we all believe that it's not possible or it is not going to be easier for me. And then, you make internally all those decisions, but then the organization is also equally thinking on the other end in terms of, how do we make it work for you, right? So voice out your concern. Nobody is going to actually take you wrong for it. So go reach out to your employee resource groups or the HR or the champions, and then put it out. So have a fair fight. That's what I would tell all my team members, that go ahead, have a fair fight. And at the end of it, if that is what it is, then you take your decision. It's just fine. You're justified in doing that, but don't let go of it thinking that, this is not going to happen, because organization is going very, very supportive in terms of handling all these crises. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Padma. All right, and with that, we come to the end of this roundtable. Thank you, dear panelists, for being here, for taking a chunk of your day out for, sharing your insights and also letting us in on what your individual organizations are doing in this particular space, as it's the ripples that we want to create, which will spread far and wide for others to take inspiration from as well. Thank you very much for being here, being the absolutely encouraging and supportive, tribe that you have been. And for our audience, thank you so much for being such an engaged audience, for, patiently listening in to all of our thoughts and perspectives. With that, this is me, Kajal, signing off on behalf of all our leaders on screen. And we will see you in the rest of our day. Stay tuned. We do have our diversity awards coming up as well. And we are felicitating organizations and individuals like these who are going the mile and being actually change champions in this journey of ours. Thank you, everyone. Signing off for now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.